I wanted to be the first minority president of the United States.
Oh, okay.
Barack Obama beat me.
Oh, Barack Obama got out ahead of you? Okay.
Yes.
Hey, teammates, welcome to another episode of It's All About the Team, and I'm excited today to have one of Ohio State's finest, Anthony Gonzalez. Welcome, Anthony.
Same grandmother who wouldn't let me commit to Ohio State until she spent a couple days with you and Mel Tucker.
So if your dad had a gratitude for the state of Ohio, why did he go to Michigan to play?
That's a good question.
Reggie Wayne was a pro's pro.
Reggie went a decade without missing a practice. Forget games.
And then we had Pat McAfee,
Yeah.
who was all unbusiness.
Pat has been the same person forever.
Oh, but he's the best, right?
Yeah, he's the best. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
You know, I never call you Anthony.
No.
I call you Gonzo. And I found an old file folder, and I had on it Tony Gonzalez. And so in high school, what did you go as?
I went by Tony.
You went by Tony.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it was Anthony at Ohio State, and then the rest of my life it's been Gonzo. But so I know that you're aware of our mission of trying to bring value to people who want to become better teammates and or people who are trying to build teams and so forth. Just this month, we lost one of our teammates in Nick Mangold, and way too young. 41 years old. We had the chance. A lot of us from here in Ohio got back to New Jersey, where Nick and his family were there for 17 years since he played his whole career with one team, with the New York Jets, and just to see the impact that he made on that community, that franchise. What do you remember about Nick Mangold as a teammate?
That's a great question. So two things come to mind. First, hilarious, awesome culture guy, right? Like fun guy to be around, a guy that everybody enjoyed, and also when I think culture, I don't think just fun. I think gets the job done, obviously, and so an incredible player and just a fun guy to be around. The second thing I would say is I was a year behind him, and you show up at a place like Ohio State, fresh off a national championship that he played in as a true freshman, and you're a bit nervous trying to find your way and just looking for a friend anywhere. And one of my first days, I remember we were in the lunch line, and he came over and just said, "Hey, you want to come sit over here for a second?" And I said, "Yeah, actually, I would love to." And it just meant a lot to me. It was a small gesture, but one that I remember and tried to pay forward when I was in that position. So sad to lose him. Amazing teammate, great culture guy, fun as can be, and it's just really sad. But grateful for the time, obviously, we had with him.
I don't remember him that much as being the fun guy.
Well, you didn't go out with him.
No, I didn't go out with him, and he always seemed to be pretty businesslike around the football world.
Yeah.
Right. I knew he had fun. I mean,
Yeah.
he was like everyone else. But what I appreciated about him as a teammate was, of course, he did his job very well, and you want your teammates to play their role.
Yep.
And he did that as good as anyone ever did at that position.
Yep.
But I always appreciated his willingness to be honest with his supervisors, i.e. his coaches.
Yeah.
And he wasn't afraid to tell Coach Bowman, what he thought about things, and consider this. And one of the greatest lessons I got from Nick Mangold was we lost to Michigan in 2003. Obviously that we didn't like that. And I remember in the off season, then going into the next year, we always talked about how do we get better at everything? How do we get better at academics and football and strength and offense, defense, special teams? But how do we get better in the rival game? That was always a topic. And, we wanted feedback.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting with him in my meeting with him, and when the part of the survey about, how can we get better in the rival game that we had just lost,
Yep.
I looked at his paper and I said, well, Nick, and I don't remember the exact phrase, but the way I took it was, well, Coach, you blew it. Yeah. And it was something along the lines, well, you made a mistake.
Yeah.
And I said, well, Nick, help me. That's why I asked you the question.
Yeah.
Glad you're willing to be honest of what you were feeling and thinking. And I'll never forget, he said, Coach, we always go to the stadium on Friday at an away game. And he said, I don't know what you were thinking, but we didn't go to the stadium before that game. And I thought back, I said, well, and it was only 3 months earlier,
Right.
so I knew why we didn't.
Right.
I said, well, Nick, I'll tell you what happened. We got to Ypsilanti. They told us Chrysler Arena was being renovated, and that there was a traffic jam, and it was probably going to be a 3 or 4 hour in and out. And I made the decision, hey, we were just there 2 years ago, and didn't think the guys would like sitting on a bus for 3 or 4 hours. And he said, well, I had never been there. And he said, when I got to the stadium, I wasn't that impressed. I lost my edge. And he said, I'm sure some of the other guys, and from that day on, I don't care if there was a hurricane, we were going to visit our stadium. But just to have the willingness to be honest with one another.
Yeah.
But he's something.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. You say that, and we have in the company that I'm co-leading now a value, which is seek and tell the truth. And that is a call to everybody that you actually have a responsibility to give that feedback upwards. And it's so valuable. Like I feel like when you get into the leadership position, sometimes for whatever reason, people feel like it's not appropriate to share what's on their mind if it's critical. And I always say, I'm not a mind reader. I'm not smart enough to figure out everything that's in people's heads. I really need the feedback.
Yeah.
and if you give it to us, we'll do everything we can to fix it. But without it, I don't know how to get better. And so it's so critical.
I don't know if you were still with us when we used the acronym WAYT. You might have been
I don't
gone.
think so.
It was, what are you thinking?
No, I wasn't there for that.
And it was shortly after we lost in 2006. And we were convinced that we weren't thinking right, whether it was the coaches, like, hey, we're undefeated and we weren't progressing, and that we didn't do a very good job of assessing, really what was going through the minds of our people. And we kind of adopted that, not just for, how are you getting ready for a big game, but
Right.
It was with everything.
Yeah.
What do you think? I know you go back to the dorm and you talk about what routes we should be running, or what coverages we should be playing.
Yeah.
And we always say we came to the conclusion that if you elicit and find out what your teammates are thinking, or the people you're supervising are thinking, two things can happen, and they're both good. One, you can get some great ideas.
Yep.
And two, you can maybe clarify some thinking that might be misdirected based on, the data or, whatever. And but that's what I loved about Nick was I always felt he was a serious guy. I knew, he was kind of one of those, sly smile guys, and I knew he had plenty of fun just based on who he hung around.
Yeah.
It was, but his willingness to just have the confidence
Yep.
and believe that it was important that, hey, you need to know what I'm thinking, and I might not, and he never made it like, oh, and I'm right.
Yeah.
But it was just like, hey, here's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Take this for consideration. Here's
Right.
what's on my mind.
Yeah. But, I couldn't help but start this episode with, here we sit taping it. it was just a few days ago that we were celebrating his life and seeing his wonderful family. And Jenny, his wife, since girlfriend since 8th grade.
Yeah.
One of those stories.
Yeah, it's
4
the best.
great kids.
Yeah.
The picture of him that was put up in front of the church. Nick was a big guy.
Yeah.
Well, this billboard that the church put up, talking about, that he was not just a, New York Jet, but he was a leader, a servant, church leader, and I mean, and then just to see the way the people talked about the impact he made on their various teams, whether it was the Jets or the Buckeyes or the church or the community, and his friends who weren't sports guys at all, but the people he had grown close with in his community, it makes you appreciate great teammates, and
Absolutely.
we were blessed to be around a lot of them, and a lot of our listeners and viewers and so forth, I'm sure, have some Buckeye lore, and they know you're a great player here, and we'll get into all of the various things you've done, which is a lot of fun. But I always like to try to take a walk through time and see how you've built what you believe is how you have learned to become as good a teammate as you can, and when given the responsibility to try to mold people together as a team. And I always loved the story of your grandparents and how they became part of the team in this country.
Yeah. I mean, I always consider myself very lucky to come from the first team, the most important team, which is my family. Blessed to have 2 incredible parents. I think I won the lottery there. Incredible siblings. And my father's family immigrated here from Cuba, and it was, it was a tricky exit, we'll say that. So the Castro regime was starting to take over Cuba. My grandparents were anti-Castro and wanted to kind of do things peacefully to oppose that. And a couple of things happened. One, that immediately put them on the outs with the Castro regime. My grandfather was offered a position in the Castro government and turned it down. And you turn something like that down, and you're signing up for a tough exit probably. And so they ended up kind of going into hiding a little bit and trying to figure out a way to get to the United States. They had done their honeymoon here, and they taught for a year in Cincinnati. They taught English, or I'm sorry, they taught Spanish in a Catholic school in Cincinnati. And so they waited for the paperwork to process and did everything they could to kind of stay out of the Castro's crosshairs, if you will. And eventually, they got the paperwork. My grandmother came first. Same grandmother who wouldn't let me commit to Ohio State until she spent a couple days with you and Mel Tucker.
Right.
But anyway, so she took the kids and they went, asked for their old jobs back. Just said, hey, we're here and we need a way to feed kids. And so moved into a small little house in Cincinnati where they raised their kids and some kids who weren't theirs, who were also from Cuba. And the rest is history. But tough family, really tough grandmother. She's still one of my favorite people in the whole world. I always have her picture with me. I always have little trinkets to remind me of her. But tough as nails, but also that velvet heart of just can do anything, can overcome anything, and loves her people and her family more than anything. So, they were very special to me growing up. Really helped raise us as my dad was running his business. His mom and dad lived nearby, and taught me how to play chess and how to read and do all these things. So, just very blessed to come from from them.
So I guess I was always under the impression, you know how folklore gets mixed up, especially if you don't have the facts. I'd always thought Grandma came over to Miami, but it was Cincinnati. I didn't know there was a...
It was Miami for a brief minute.
Okay.
So everybody kind of showed up in Miami, and then that's when they called. You know, as soon as she got there, she called the old school and just said, "Hey, is there any way I can come back and get our jobs?" And I don't know how long they were in Miami. I don't know what that period was, but I know they were stuck down there for a period of time, and then they did get their old jobs back and came up and lived in a place called Sailor Park, which is, as my dad would say, the other side of the tracks in Cincinnati. But had an amazing childhood, and the thing that we all they developed, and it was inspired in us, and my mom's family's the same way, is just an incredible gratitude for this country and for the state of Ohio and all that it's given us. So it's kind of
So if your dad
story.
had a gratitude for the state of Ohio, why did he go to Michigan to play?
That's a good question. I don't know. You know what? I never asked him about his college selection process in that respect. I guess he maybe fell in love with Bo Schembechler, I guess. But the one thing I'll say with him, he the second I told him I wanted to go to Ohio State, he became the biggest Ohio State fan in the country. So
no, there's no question about that. So so from Michigan, how did you end up being a Cleveland family?
Yeah, so he went to Michigan, played for Bo for a couple years, blew out his knee, and then the first job he took was driving truck was one of the first jobs he took was driving truck for a steel company. And the way he tells it is, the more and more he got into the business and the more interested he became and the more obsessed he became, he started to see the angles for himself and just felt that entrepreneurial bug. But that first job was in Cleveland.
Okay.
And so he did that and then married my mom, and, her entire family's west side of Cincinnati. Nobody ever leaves, sort of thing. And he moved her all the way to Cleveland, which was it was
another
like
country.
Yeah, might as well have been. Yeah. So that was a big move.
So it wasn't Les Miles that got him, who was from Elyria, that.
Yeah. So he and Les are still, incredibly close, best friends in a lot of ways. And Les's mom and dad worked for my dad.
Really?
Yeah. So they worked for Hope Miles was Les's father. Hope was a world-class salesman, had a personality like Les's, if anybody knows Les. And his mother was sweet as can be, Martha, and she worked in the office as well. And so they were kind of one big family in a lot of ways.
So for the viewers that don't know, Les Miles and Mr. Gonzalez were roommates?
Roommates, best friends at Michigan. Yep.
Les ended up getting into the coaching world, and for you sports fans, he ended up being the head coach at Oklahoma State and LSU, and was an assistant for Bo at Michigan, and he was a good west side of Cleveland guy.
He was.
I saw Les this past winter, his wife was the assistant basketball coach at the University of Michigan.
Yep.
Women's coach, great lady,
Yep.
and it's always good to bump in and tell our old Big Ten war stories. So as you think back, what you can recall as a kid growing up in Cleveland, what were the team lessons that became obvious to you that were ingrained?
Yeah. So I would say, first, I always start, most important team is your family team, right? We had what felt like for me a very typical childhood, but I would say like the things that, as I reflect on it, that are more big picture that could apply to any team. My parents created a very clear sense of community, like community amongst our family. So, the family unit being the most critical element, and making sure that we as a family were close, that we had the same values, that we were living into those values, holding ourselves accountable to those values, really creating something kind of bigger than the individual, right? The family was more important than what any one kid or family member had going on. And so I think it kind of started there. And then the idea of setting very clear goals, expectations, and what we can each do. I remember, and they were personalized. Our family, it was different for each kid. What does my brother Joe want to do academically, socially, spiritually, athletically? What does Nick want to do? What do I want to do? What does Christine want to do? And my father really drilled that into us at a pretty young age, and I've always carried that with me. And then the first formal team that I would say really started what I consider just the luckiest streak of coaches that I probably could have had was Chuck Kyle, my high school coach. And I think there's, whether it's Chuck Kyle or you or Tony Dungy or Alpine Investors, who I work with now, I always say the best teams that I've ever been on, they have, whether they state it or not, the phrase, they don't know how much, or they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. It's sort of embedded into the culture. And so for everybody, I can kind of tell you, like Chuck Kyle wanted to develop you physically, spiritually, academically. Blocko of Life, Coach Tressel. Alpine Investors, people first. I can tell you what that all means. Cobalt, what we're running, we're trying to do something similar. And I think that's something I noticed first with my parents, because they cared deeply about our kids, or their kids, and our family and how we were doing. And I'm so lucky to have them. But then each of those coaches really invested in the entire person and made it very clear that we're here to win games, we're here to win championships, we're here to win in business, but that is not sufficient. Yep. That is a part of the story, not the entire story. And so that started at the home for me. Yep. As a young kid, and I've seen it. Every great organization I've ever been a part of or observed has that. And the ones that maybe win once or twice but can't quite sustain it, what I've noticed is they don't have it as deeply.
It's interesting you say that. I was just with the Ohio Manufacturers Association. Mm-hmm. And in my role here with Governor DeWine, one of the things he's asked me to really try to work hard on is the whole workforce.
Yep.
Because we're blessed in the state of Ohio. We have some great opportunities that have come our way. Pendulum has swung back to us a little bit. We were the industrial juggernaut, and then we lost a lot, and then but now it's coming back in a different way. It's not steel mills and this and that, but so we've been working hard on, okay, we're going to have these opportunities now that we've got to create that workforce, right?
Yep.
And visiting with the OMA the other day, it really dawned on me that they've got an amazing blueprint. They call it their manufacturer's blueprint. Mm-hmm. For their workforce, and they've got everything lined up, and it really dawned on me that the thing that can make it work is that not that we can convince someone that A, there's opportunity, B, we've got training,
yep,
but C, we care about you.
Yep.
Not just the job you're going to do for that company. Mm-hmm. And until we can convince them we care about them, I don't care how good your training programs are. Yeah. I don't care how many job opportunities. How can we get across to the people that we need to attract to fill that workforce? And so much of it, I think, begins at, I think people do want expectations.
Yeah.
And you said there, your dad clearly early on, there's going to be expectations. And I just feel as if we haven't been as good at giving expectations, and that's made it a little bit harder for us to build these teams that we want to build. Mm-hmm. whether it's statewide or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point. I think it's a mix, right? It's expectations, and people are smart and they know if you care about them. They can figure it out in 2 seconds. and there's expectations because I, the manager or the organization, need to hit my numbers, and so that's why these expectations are where they are, right? And it comes from a selfish place. The ones that can galvanize a team, in my opinion, are the ones where it starts. Here's the expectations because this is where we collectively all get better and we all develop. And I'm here to invest in you as a person first and foremost. Yep. And if we build all that together, and you know that I will do anything to support you and grow you, people feel that. Yep. And that makes the expectations a heck of a lot. They're not easier, but it makes it more meaningful to chase them together. I think.
There's loving expectations, and then there's lion trainer expectations, right?
Right.
Two different kinds. So as you think back to St. Ignatius High School, legendary. We've had 12 state championships or something wild. And,
that's right.
So you're there and you're a freshman, okay? And you're feeling that coaching staff, Coach Kyle and Coach Restifo, or I don't know who all the coaches were back in the day, and you feel that they care about you.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yep.
Who then of the older kids, can you think of someone that kind of reinforced that, hey, I'm getting this feeling that, and then I can look to this kind of person that maybe gave you a little tip on being a good teammate for St. Ignatius?
Yeah, that's easy. Ryan Franzinger. So Ryan Franzinger was the coach at St. Ignatius after Chuck Kyle. But he was a year above me. Ultimately went to Ohio State. He was a teammate there as well.
Sure.
But Ryan was the best personification of what I thought it meant to be an Ignatius man, which was selfless. Ignatius is valued, man for others is sort of the motto there. So it's a call to service. Ryan was that. He was the personification of that. He loved St. Ignatius, loves St. Ignatius, all that it stood for, stands for, its history, its traditions, and honored those, and really served as the best example from a culture standpoint of kind of what it meant to be a great teammate. And the other thing, right, like I think people sometimes think of culture as soft, and I think it's the least soft thing ever.
Right. It's hard.
Yeah, it's hard, and it's demanding.
Yeah.
Like anything important. And so he had a standard for himself on the field, and for himself as a leader that you could look up to and admire. Another one who's currently the head coach of the Cardinals, John Gannon. John Gannon was he was 2 years older than me. John Gannon was a wide receiver and a cornerback, which is what I wanted to be. And so I looked up to him as a player, and he was another guy who just poured his heart and soul into his team, into his craft, and was an easy guy to follow because he took his mentorship role seriously. Like some people get into that position. He was the man, right? His senior year, starting point guard on the basketball team, incredible basketball player, great athlete all around, and big personality, good, great personality. Some people like that can get, it's not my job to.
Yeah, right.
That's not for me. That's for somebody else. Watch me. You don't have to. I'm not going to talk to you.
Right.
But John and Ryan both, in different ways, really took it upon themselves to mentor and to show people. This is what it looks like. And so I'm here to help you.
It's interesting. The leadership of a team can create the the plan, the blueprint. Absolutely, you can sense if it's genuine or not.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the people that can really reinforce it are the people who are in the trenches with you,
Yeah.
and who are kind of echoing that they think that Coach Kyle cares deeply about me, or whatever. So fast forward, you're a freshman at Ohio State. Who jumped out to you as being the person that you kind of noticed and gave you a little bit of, even if they didn't talk to you about it, gave you guidance about being a great Buckeye?
Yeah. Great question. The first name that comes into my head when you say that is actually a defensive player, Will Allen. So I was a freshman. I was on the scout team. I was a wide receiver. I was a defensive back for about 3 days, as you might remember.
I do recall.
And in any event, I was going up against Will a lot, and so I got to observe him. And that was a defense that, again, was coming off a national championship and had a lot of guys returning. And not all the guys were as
welcoming
as Will.
Okay.
Yeah. Some, most were.
Yeah.
There were a couple in particular that were just, they weren't for me, which is fine. That happens on any team. But Will, first off, worked his butt off. He was always in the weight room. He was always in the film room. He was a guy who you could tell was taking it seriously. He was going to get every single thing out of his Ohio State experience that he could. And I admired that about him. And he was a kind person. Like he knew that, hey, this is hard. We're all working hard together. But, at the end of the day, we're teammates and Buckeye brothers in different ways. And I saw Will for the first time in probably 10 years a couple weeks ago at the Ohio State-Texas game, and gave him a big hug and just thanked him for being that way, because it left a big impression on me.
When you bring up Will Allen, so we got to Ohio State in 2001. We're getting ready for spring practice, and everyone has opinions when you're, the new bosses come in and they're telling you this department guys are good, or this worker is good, or this one's not good, and this and so you're hearing all that, and I'll never forget. I was starting to get some chatter, into me about, hey, you know what, there's two guys here. I'm not sure, they're going to make it. I'm they might have been recruiting mistakes and this and that, and I said, well, who's that? And I said, well, Will Allen. Not sure he can play here. And I said, well, we haven't even had spring practice yet. Why don't we just have some spring practice? And the other was Michael Jenkins.
There you go. Yeah.
And I said, well, look, I don't know either of them.
Yeah.
I was at Youngstown, Ohio. One's from Dayton, one's from Florida. I didn't recruit them. I don't know them. Let's wait and see. And we got to spring practice, and I remember Joe Daniels, of course, remember Coach Daniels. We're walking off the field on the first day, and I said to Joe, Joe, number 12 there, Michael Jenkins. I said, I heard all this noise of, I'm not sure he can help us. What'd you think of him? I thought he was pretty good. And Joe said, yeah, he's going to really be good. I said, okay, good. And then so I'm talking to the defensive coaches who were new, didn't know Will Allen.
Yeah.
And I said to Mark D'Antonio and those guys, 26, I don't even know him that well.
Yeah.
But man, I think he's going to be pretty. Great team member. Studies the game. So forth and so on. And a great lesson for me was, we got to make sure we don't get preconceived notions.
Yeah.
Is that we find out what kind of people they are. Because the reason Will Allen and Michael Jenkins ended up being great players and great NFL players, between the two of them, they probably played 25 years, in the NFL. Yeah. And it's because of the kind of teammates they were.
Yeah.
The kind of people they were.
Yeah, it's what's inside of them.
Yeah, and so now we're at the Colts, okay? And as you think about were they just coming off a Super Bowl?
Yeah, so I got to Ohio State 1 year after a national championship,
Yeah.
and the Colts 1 year after a Super Bowl.
And so when you got there, now it's not 100 guys, it's 50 guys.
Yep.
And not 3 and 4 years apart in age, but sometimes 10 and 12 years apart in age, right?
Yep.
Walk through what you learned about teammates there and also staff.
Yeah. Man, that's a good question. So a couple things come to mind. And again, back to, I just blessed to have great leaders in my life that I've learned a lot from. First day in the first week, I remember Tony Dungy getting in front of the room, and it's just the rookies. And it's him and Bill Polian. Bill Polian, general manager. Tony's the coach. And Tony gave a speech, and he just said, "Look, guys, I know you've all heard about hazing, and you've heard about rookie initiations and all that stuff. I just tell you, we don't do that here. We expect our rookies to play. We're going to treat you like men. We're going to treat you like professionals. We're going to coach you up, and we want this to be a place where you feel like you can do your best work, because that's what we need." And then Bill Polian came right after him and basically gave the same message and said, "Look, we're pretty straightforward here. We build the entire organization around serving the players. And if we are putting all of our time and energy and resources into making you the best players, but also the best people you can be, then we think that gives us the best chance of winning." And that was true to form for the entire time I was with the Colts. And I only played with one team. I was with New England for a brief cup of coffee before I went to business school. But I would hear about other teams and other cultures, and it was just clear that because of what we had at the top, and then the quality of the people we had on the team, Peyton Manning, Dwight Freeney, Jeff Saturday, Reggie Wayne, Dallas Clark, you can go forever. This was an incredible group of people, that our culture was very strong. It had incredibly high expectations. We were trying to win the Super Bowl every single year. And it was also a place where they respected you and they invested in you as a person. And so, that to me was, again, just feeling these through lines of consistency. And what I've always said is, when I get into a leadership position, I want to take these lessons that I've learned from these incredible people and try to apply them. But it started with Tony and Bill. Probably started with the owner, honestly, with Jim Irsay. But then Tony and Bill, and then the players themselves. And
so how long was Tony the head coach before
I had
Jim
2 years.
Caldwell?
Yeah, I had 2 years with Tony.
Okay.
Classic NFL fashion. I found out on the ESPN cryon that he wasn't going to be the coach anymore.
Right? Wow.
Yeah. Typical NFL. Yeah. You find out in the newspaper when your boss is gone. But anyway, yeah, I had Tony for 2 years, and even though it was only 2 years, made a big impact on me as a leader and as a person, and even later in life, like when I was in Congress and the whole unrest coming off of the George Floyd situation. Tony was somebody I called, and I just said, "Hey, I just need somebody to provide some perspective for me. I'm trying to figure it all out, and I want to make sure I'm leading the right way." And Tony gave me 3 hours of his time, and there was some serious gold in there. But I share that to share that Tony, like you, like Chuck Kyle, like Graham Weaver, who's the founder of Alpine, it's more than just the performance. Yeah. That is not sufficient. That is it's important, and we're all chasing it, and we're all going to hold ourselves accountable to it. But there's got to be more than that.
Hey teammates, I want to tell you about a project we're working on with Youngstown State University. One of the ways Ellen and I have decided to give back is through the Tressel Institute for Leadership and Teamwork. We've collected a set of successful business and nonprofit leaders to serve as guest servant leaders in partnership with the Sokolov Honors College to teach university students teamwork, leadership, and personal skills. We teach from a foundation built on gratitude, excellence, hope, love, and selflessness. If you're a young person or parent helping to search for a unique college experience, you can learn more at tresselinstitute.ysu.edu or ysu.edu. Links will be provided in the show notes.
That's the way I felt about Jim Caldwell, who
Yep.
you had your next couple of years. I just, I didn't know Jim that well, and then I
Yeah.
got to spend that half a season with you guys. You were banged up, and I was kind of just shuffling papers there as a consultant or whatever, and I was just, really, Jim was the reason I went, because
Yeah.
I knew of him, but I had met him enough, and he was just so genuine and coached for what I thought were the right reasons. And
Yep.
and in fact, I thought one of the most masterful coaching jobs I ever saw was, I remember when he called me, he said, "Hey, look, Peyton's out. We got some guys injured. We're not going to be as good as we've been, but I want to win as many games as we can, and we're going to do
Yep.
things the way we always do them, and we're going to build good men and so forth and so on. And why don't you come over and have some fun with us, and let's see if we can win a couple games."
Yeah.
Well, after 13 games, we hadn't won any.
Yeah. Just say we won a couple.
Yeah, right. But
Yeah.
that to me was the strength of the team and the culture. Was we're going into the Tennessee game
Yeah.
0-13, nothing to play for. Not all of our good players, many of our good players were out.
Yeah.
We're playing with guys that were trying like crazy, but they weren't at the level of the people we were playing. And I'm thinking to myself, this is going to be an interesting thing to tell my grandkids, is that the one year I was in the NFL, Grandpa was 0-16 and so forth. And so we're getting ready to play Tennessee, and I thought, this is going to be tough. Tennessee, if they win this game, they're in the playoff hunt.
Yep.
We have nothing to play for. We're not at our strength. We go and win that game. And I'm thinking, how Jim Caldwell and that culture held it together was beyond me. Well, then we're getting ready to play Houston.
Yep.
Houston, all they need to do is beat us, and they've got the home field advantage in the playoffs.
Yep.
And they're good.
Yeah, they're good.
They were really good.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, this is going to have to be a miracle if we're going to hang in there with these guys. And we beat them.
Yep.
And to this day, I tell people when they say, well, give me an example of a great coaching job. I said, well, look, I wasn't there for all of it, but I saw one with Jim Caldwell and just a great human being.
Yeah. I'll tell you what strikes me about that, and I agree with you. When you're having difficulties, if you have a weak culture, all of a sudden the finger pointing and this guy stinks and that guy stinks and coach doesn't know what he's doing and you're old and it's just the deck just shifts. And that team, what I'll remember is nobody did that.
No.
Everybody was supportive. Everybody hung in. It didn't feel any different culturally. Guys showed up professionally, and that's where you have good veterans, right? Jeff Saturday was always going to be that way. Right. Reggie Wayne was always going to be that way.
Reggie Wayne was a pro's pro in my mind.
Oh yeah,
watching him.
That guy, Reggie went a decade without missing a practice. Forget games.
Right.
He went a decade plus without missing a practice. Yep. And in the NFL, as you know, your stars tend to practice about 45 minutes a week.
Right.
I should say tend to. They can get away with that if they want. And not Reggie. Reggie and Marvin was the same way.
Yep.
Marvin Harrison was every practice for a decade plus. And sometimes, and it's not because they weren't hurt. Reggie you'd see him on a Monday and you're going, how the heck is he going to play this week? Not only would he play, he'd practice the whole week. So, it was.
And you had the dichotomy of your two specialists. Adam Vinatieri was, all business, and then we had Pat McAfee.
Yeah.
Who was all unbusiness.
Pat has been the same person forever.
Oh, but he's the best, right?
Yeah, he's the best. Yeah.
He's just the greatest guy, and he brought that bubbly.
Yep.
Just like he does on TV now. And,
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things I cherish that I remember sitting with you when we were in Indianapolis, and you were talking about, well, I remember my goal sheets from back in the day, and now I've got to start thinking, I'm through this chapter perhaps because of my injury situation, and I got to start thinking about it. And we were chit-chatting about this and that, and I remember you saying, I may apply to, Stanford, or I can't remember if there was anyone else in the picture in your thinking, but and then, we went our separate ways, and I don't know how much later it was, but I remember getting the call from you saying, hey, I'm going out to Stanford.
Yeah.
So what made you decide at that chapter in your life that, Stanford's the right place for me? You're an Ohio guy, Indianapolis, New England Patriots. Now you're going 2,500 miles the other direction. Why Stanford?
Yeah. This will sound like a ridiculous answer, but it is the answer. So
you knew Elizabeth was there.
I knew my wife would be there. Yeah. No, so it actually goes back to freshman year at Ohio State. So I was redshirting, and was miserable, of course. It was bowl practice, so there's nobody on campus. There's nothing to do. It was single-digit temperatures out,
Right.
And I was in a Borders, Books and Music, back when Borders existed, and I had the old U.S. News and World Report that had all the college rankings. And so I'm looking through that, and while I'm sitting there, I'm thinking to myself, I don't know if football's going to work out. I'm redshirting, I'm homesick being all of 100 miles from my house. I didn't know. And so I thought I better have something else in my life in case this doesn't work out. So let me see. And I knew I always thought I wanted to be an attorney. Thought I wanted to go to law school, and then ultimately, I wanted to be a Supreme Court judge. I thought that was the coolest job in the world. I still think it's probably a pretty cool job. But
I just read Amy Coney Barrett's book,
I got to read
Listening to the Law.
Yeah.
Because, I'm in the executive branch, and I work with the General Assembly.
Yep.
And I think, I don't know anything about the judicial. So I got her book, very instructive book for a layman.
Yep.
She is a great teacher because she was a Notre Dame faculty member.
Yeah.
But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, so that was in my head. It's like, I want to be a Supreme Court justice. And so I'm looking at law schools in the U.S. News and World Report magazine, and there's a picture of Stanford. Now, it's December in Ohio,
Right.
and I see a picture of what looks like paradise, and I say, well, it looks like a good school. They're a top 5 school. And boy, does that look a heck of a lot better than what I'm seeing outside right now. So in my head, I said, all right, when I'm done with this game, whether it's in 4 years or 15 years, I'm going to go to law school at Stanford. That was what was in my head.
Well, it's funny. I recall some goal-setting conversation times we had, and I always thought that it was the first Hispanic president of the United States.
That was also in my head.
Okay. All right.
That was later. That was later. That was later, yes.
Because I remember getting with Lanice.
Yeah.
Whenever we would have the goal setting, we'd say, okay, great. Now, what's the plan, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember.
I wanted to be the first minority president of the United States.
Oh, okay.
Barack Obama beat me.
Oh, Barack Obama got out ahead of you? Okay.
Yeah. So they're good. Yeah.
But I remember we sat down with Mike Lanice.
Yeah.
Because part of your plan was, well, I'm going to get a Rhodes Scholarship.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to, boom, boom, boom. I'm going to be the governor of Ohio. I can't even remember.
Governor was on the list.
Yeah, governor was on the list.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to be the president. But anyway, I remember, Lanice, we were sitting spring practice after your freshman year. Mm-hmm. And we said, okay, let's invite Lanice over because he got a Rhodes Scholarship. He was a wide receiver at Ohio State. And I'll never forget Lanice. Do you remember the first question he asked you?
I don't.
Lanice said to you, well, Anthony, if you're a first-round draft choice in the NFL, are you going to accept the Rhodes Scholarship or are you going to accept the NFL?
Yeah.
And you kind of put your head down. And I felt bad for you. And I said to Michael, Michael, That's easy for you to say because you weren't going to be a first-round draft choice, and you knew your answer was you'd take the Rhodes Scholarship. But this guy might be a first-round draft choice.
Yeah.
And you honestly said to him, well, you can only play football for so long. I think I would go to the NFL.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah, I do. And I actually, that conversation was really helpful because, and I'll give gratitude to you for it, because you set it up thinking, hey, he's talking about Rhodes Scholarship and he can also play football, so let me help him at least think through this. Yeah. And after that conversation, I remember thinking to myself, Rhodes Scholar isn't my dream. My dream's to be an NFL football player. And the Rhodes Scholarship was something people talked about on my behalf because my grades were good and I was, and so it's like, hey, you should look at this. And it was, honored to be considered for that. But when I really sat and thought, what's the road that I want to pave? It didn't involve a Rhodes Scholarship.
Why philosophy major?
Why not? So let me tell you a story. So
Why not? But why? There's still got to be an answer to why.
Yeah, no, there is. As I mentioned earlier, my grandparents were really important people in my life. My dad's dad was an attorney, and his mom was an attorney. And he always said, if you want to be an attorney, you should major in philosophy and English. Those were the two things that he always said. And when I got to Ohio State, as I said, I was a little lost. I was a business major for a period of time. I didn't really enjoy those classes that much. And then I took a philosophy 101 class, and I just loved the content. I loved the way it pushes your thinking, the way it forces you to logically make arguments and articulate those. It just fit for me. Sometimes you encounter a topic or a subject and it just clicks in your head. And that's how philosophy was for me. And that's when, again, this all happened right in freshman year. Mm-hmm. So it was a mix of starting as a business major, taking the philosophy class, being in the borders, thinking about my life, and that's when all right, it's Stanford Law School, and I want to be a Supreme Court justice. And then as I grew through Ohio State, I switched that from Supreme Court justice to president or governor. Yep. And governor, you sent me my goal sheets the other day. Governor's what's on there, for what it's worth. I showed my wife. I said, "See, it's not crazy.
It's not folklore."
Yeah, I've always thought this way. Right. Though I'm done with elected politics. But in any event, so then business actually is. I got back into the business mindset after my third year in the NFL. They had these. They probably still have them. These week-long courses at the top business schools in the country. Yeah. And I went. And I'll never forget, I called my mom after the first day. I said, I know exactly what I'm going to do when I'm done with this game. I'm going to go to business school. This thing was at Harvard. I said, I'm going to either go to Harvard or Stanford, and I'm going to launch a business career because this is awesome. And that's how the whole evolution kind of played out.
So how'd you meet Elizabeth at Stanford?
Semi-blind date.
Okay.
Yeah. So like business school classes are like high school cliques. Like they're very social and gossipy in a lot of ways, but it was near the end of our term, and my mom actually was the one who said she had been out there and she met a friend of ours named Kelly, and she said, you should ask Kelly if she has friends, because I have a sneaky feeling she's going to have a friend for you. And so Kelly Wright was her name at the time, and I said, all right, Kelly, my mom says I have to ask you to set me up with a friend.
Here you are, 30 years old or whatever.
Yeah, my mom, tail between my legs. And, we were sitting in the back of a class, and she pulled up, on Facebook, Elizabeth's profile. And I said, she's definitely cute. Let me do a little research. Found out she was, college athlete. She was a swimmer, All-American swimmer at Stanford. We're Catholics. She went to Marist in Atlanta, which is a great Catholic
Doc Spurgeon School.
Doc Spurgeon School, and Anderson Russell.
That's right.
But
Mike Matimo.
Mike Matimo, I didn't know that.
Yeah, Mike Matimo was from there, and he's like Special Forces now.
Yeah. So anyway, I did that research. My mom also did that research. She said, I see she went to Marist. I think you should go on that date. So anyway, we did that, and there were 50 other people there, all kind of, what's going on over there. Right. But yeah, we had that date. It went horribly. She shook my hand at the end. I went for a hug. I thought, well, I blew that. And then come to find out she was just hungry. So her friend Kelly
just swam 2 miles or something.
Yeah, yeah. And Kelly said, no, she really liked it. Here's her number. And I was leaving for Japan like 2 days later. And I texted her and said, I want to take you to dinner before I go. And so quickly did that. And then I basically just didn't leave her alone until she said yes and married me.
It's a good thing that one of my efforts didn't happen. You might not remember this, but I don't know what year you were. And I don't know who I was talking to, one of the ladies in the office or whatever, and they said, well, we've got this student coming over that we're interviewing for a student worker, and she's like brilliant student. She's from Cincinnati, Ursuline Academy, or one of those. And so she came over. She was a cute girl. Well, you happened to be in the locker room, and I said, Gonzo's a little shy. I think it'd be a good idea if he took this young lady on a tour of the Woody Hayes. Do you remember that?
A little bit, yes.
And
yeah,
being like Dad, trying to be a matchmaker, whatever.
Yeah.
And it was the quickest tour I've ever seen. It lasted about 11 minutes. I thought normally a tour of the Woody takes about an hour, right?
Yeah, right.
And, but so it's a good thing. So Elizabeth can thank me for not being a very successful matchmaker.
No, but look, you tried. Sheila Smith tried. I mean, I had a lot of people who were
right.
As you said, I was and still am like pretty reserved, naturally introverted person. So I needed a little help, but Kelly was the one who got it.
There you go. So you get your MBA. What made you decide who you were going to go to work with? Because now you have to decide what team do I want to be on, and how did you go through that team? So, because the Colts drafted you, you had no choice.
That's right.
Now you got to pick a team.
Yep. And for that, there were sort of two things in my head. One, I got to Stanford, I didn't know anything. I mean, I didn't think I knew anything. It turned out, I think because of how I was raised and the coaches I was around, that anything leadership, general management related, my instincts were pretty good relative to my classmates. If we were in class together, that's where all my best grades were. I needed finance and accounting, and I needed a general business toolkit. So I did a summer at McKinsey, which is a great consulting firm.
Great firm.
And learned a lot, but didn't feel it in here. Felt like I could learn a ton, but I don't know that I'd really enjoy this, and I don't know that that I'm cut out for this long term. I remember being in a car with our manager, and he said, "Man, the partner has the best life. He gets to meet with Meg Whitman and Steve Jobs and blah blah." And I turned to him and I said, "Wouldn't you rather just be Meg Whitman?"
Right.
Like, I don't want to meet with her. I'd rather just have that life.
Right.
And so that was in my head as like, this probably isn't for me, though I appreciate the profession certainly. And so my second year, as we had different class guests, you're just listening to them, and they're all incredibly accomplished. They're all very smart. But the one class guest who came in, and when he presented, I said, that is how he's talking about building companies and businesses is exactly how I feel. And his name's Graham Weaver. He's the founder of Alpine Investors. At the time, Alpine was a $200 million fund. Today, it's assets under management over $10 billion. And this was about a decade ago. But Graham is from Ohio. I think that's part of why I was drawn to him. But
which part of Ohio?
I think southwest, like Dayton area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
And his philosophy can be encapsulated with the words "people first," which, as may be implied, is all about saying we believe that we will win because we are going to invest in our people in ways that nobody else is willing to do. And we're going to put our people at the center of everything we do. And we're going to win because of that, not in spite of it, but because of that. And nobody else came in and talked it that way. And people have different ways of saying, our people are our most important thing, and this, that, and the other. But they say that, and then they move on to a whole bunch of things that aren't people related. Graham came in and spent the whole hour and a half with our class talking about, here's how we invest, here's how we support our people, here's how we do it. It is unique. If you were to go to the Alpine offices, the one thing people say is, it's like a bunch of children here running the show. Their thing is, we find people with super high attributes, low on the experience curve, and we give them way more responsibility than anybody else will give them. But if we do that right, they're going to hit the mark. And it comes with, again, wrapping the support and the investment around the individuals doing that job. He presented, I said, I got to get coffee with this guy. And so I reached out to him, and he said, why don't you come to the office? And I said, okay, great. And 6 hours later, I got done with a job interview that I didn't know I was taking. Met with every partner, met with everybody in the office at the time. And they offered me a job to help run one of their companies, which I did for about a year. And then life took me elsewhere. I went and ran a startup and then served in Congress. But on my way out of Congress, it's so interesting. I hadn't seen them since I left. It's been almost a decade. And I knew the thing I loved most about Congress was being able to serve people that I love. That was by far the most important and best part of that job, being able to serve the people I love. As people, Northeast Ohio, but it's more than that, right? It's the country, it's the kinds of people in Northeast Ohio, hardworking, blue collar, good folks, just great values. I wanted to keep doing that, and I wanted to do it at scale. And so I had this idea, which was, I want to buy a bunch of companies in a particular industry. This isn't a novel idea. Other people do this. But and I want to use the things that I've learned in business, in football, in politics, and bring them to bear here and create something special for the people inside the company. And so I told Graham, hey, here's my idea. I'd love your advice. And he said, well, I don't know if you know this, but we do that all the time. So why don't you just come back and do it here? And so I thought about it for a while and met my business partner around that time as well, who's from Alpine, and just said, this is the team I want to be a part of. This is the partner. These are the partners I want. This is the capital partner I want. This is the business partner I want. We want to create the same thing, and we believe the same things about the importance of making those investments. And it's been awesome. Yeah.
Team lessons you learned in Congress.
I got a lot of things not to do.
Right?
Yeah. Team lessons in Congress. I'll say this, politics is unbelievably frustrating for most of America, and it is for those who do it, because you have a view and a perspective and you want to drive forward on it, but there's every barrier you can possibly think of in your way. I'll say this, and maybe it's something that will be a little frustrating, but I do think the parties generally stay together, and that can be very frustrating for the American people because you want to see some compromise and you want to see advancement, right, but you get a lot of retrenchment, and that comes from, honestly, I think the parties both have very clear perspectives on what they are and what they stand for and who they are, and those are at odds with one another.
Sure.
And so I think it's unfortunate for the country, but if you said, hey, are they strong teams? I would say they actually are in a lot of ways, and that can be to our detriment,
right,
as a society. But I do think they're there's a connectivity. Sometimes it blows up and there's infighting, but generally speaking, the parties are very solidly organized.
So I've had 8 or 9 months now, much different scale than a national scale. But prior to these 8 or 9 months, the limited opportunities I had to be at the large scale, the federal side of things, I guess 2 things I would reflect on. One is I remember going as a college president, talking about higher education, and having a chance to, that's not the only topic.
Right.
So and I was pleasantly surprised that there's a lot more, I guess, similar thought on both sides of the aisle on a lot of things.
Yeah, for sure.
But that the ones where there isn't, it gets the most, discussion, PR, fighting and whatever. But just working with people on both sides on things that were generally accepted, I always came away thinking, there's a lot more good going on than there's bad.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I would say, the thing I always had in my head is like I was thinking like a 2x2 matrix. So there's things that are on one end politically easy or difficult, and then there's on the other axis intellectually easy or difficult. Anything that's politically difficult is going to be pulling teeth to get done. Just doesn't. So like that whole part of the quadrant is hard to move. The place you can get a lot done is politically easy, intellectually straightforward. And so I tried to hang out all in that box because I thought my job was to pass laws. So
didn't you have, like your freshman year, didn't you?
Yeah, I had the most
passed laws. I remember that.
Of anybody, in the minority. We were in the minority, but I think I had 8 or 9 or something. But anyway, but it's by hanging out in that box. And that's where I think the majority of the pieces of legislation that get done, though that box doesn't get headlines.
But there's a lot getting done.
Right.
That was always my impression. And I guess the second one was, you were kind enough to bring me to the State of the Union.
Yeah.
And, I'd never been at anything like that. And so walking around and meeting people that I'd, only read about, but I only read about the sensational parts, not the real work that they do. And what I thought was pretty cool was you'd only been there a year?
Yeah.
At that point?
Yeah. It's
and
my first one.
Their impression of you was that, you were always seeking knowledge. You were always seeking working together with everyone that you could. In fact, didn't you guys put together some team of freshmen, Republicans and Democrats?
Yeah, there was.
What was that called?
Well, it wasn't just freshmen. There's a couple things.
It wasn't just freshmen?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I did a couple things like that. Everything, again, I hung out in the box of politically straightforward, intellectually straightforward. If we can stay in that box, we'll get a lot done. As a result, the coalitions that I built and the groups that I joined were all about that box.
Okay.
And so there was something called the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is, say, it's Noah's Ark. So you come in 2 by 2, Republican and Democrat go in together. It's equal.
Yep.
I think, I don't know how many people, but let's say 50 on each side. That's a forum for getting a lot done. And it was the members that I really enjoyed working with were all in that. And then there was also a group I started, co-started with freshmen when the government was shut down, as it is now. We came into the longest government shutdown in American history at the time. The current one is longer. But and we, within about the first 2 weeks, a group of freshmen put a group together and said, hey, we don't have any baggage. Let's just see if we can unlock something. And so, unfortunately, we ended up just making more noise. Didn't actually have as big an impact as we wanted, but it was an important first step in terms of establishing kind of who I wanted to be as a member and where I wanted to focus, which was all on bipartisan stuff. Those are the only things that are durable.
Right, right.
So
The other cool thing I remember is we got to see the Library of Congress,
yeah,
which, I mean, I'd always heard of the Library of Congress,
Yeah.
but I didn't realize. Tell our viewers how that Library of Congress and for what reason it was started. I thought it was fascinating.
yeah. It's first off, it's an incredibly beautiful building.
Yeah.
I think it's overlooked. Frankly, it's gorgeous, right across from the Capitol. It's probably my favorite building in Washington. But in any event, so the Library of Congress, as the name would suggest, was started to serve the members of Congress, to provide research, to give them a place to get smart on issues. And today there's an entire entity that it basically serves as analysts to the members of Congress on anything that comes before them. And so, sometimes you'll deal with an issue that you've just never confronted before. And you say, boy, I need to get smart on this thing quickly. And your staff can help you get smart for sure. But if you want something really in depth and really meaty, you can call the Congressional Research Service, which is tied to the Library of Congress. And they will come in with experts in the field, having done a bunch of research. They will present you a brief. They'll give you the document. They'll help answer any questions you have. And I'll give them credit, they do it in a nonpartisan way. Like you go and, okay, if this happens, what's going to happen in that law? And they will tell you, based on my reading, it's this. It's up to you as the member to decide how you want to vote on that thing. But in terms of helping members get smart on very tricky issues quickly, that's all part of the Library of Congress. And then obviously it's a library, and so you got the books and all that stuff.
Right.
But its primary function is to serve the Congress in terms of their ability to get smart quickly on everything that's coming.
And
at
is
them.
it pretty well utilized?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I used them. I mean, I can only speak for myself, but
Right.
I used them a lot.
Yeah.
And it was usually on things that were just a little bit tricky. Like most issues in Congress, or a lot of issues in Congress, they have 50 years of history. Mm-hmm. And, there's not a ton of new points being made. But, there are some things that come up in society that are different and new that we haven't quite confronted before. And that's where they were perfect for me. It was like, hey, I'm not quite sure how to think about this thing. Can you go research this, this, and this? And I want it, I want it set up this way.
Right.
And they'll come back to you a week later, and here it is. And they're awesome. So yeah, it's a really neat service. On top of being obviously a beautiful building.
Right. So speaking of things that change, and we'll end on this thought, but it might be a lengthy thought. So you go back to Team Gonzalez when you were growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're building your own Team Gonzalez. Mm-hmm. The world and the country is way different than the 90s or whenever you grew up. I don't know how old you are. I can't keep track of you guys.
41.
Okay. So as you think about this being a new world and an ever-changing world, what differences in building a team do you think there are today at home than there were when you were growing up?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one by far is social media and connectivity generally. But I would say as a parent, the thing that gives me the most anxiety about how to raise our kids to be, good, happy, thoughtful, productive kids, is the impact that social media has on children and connectivity in general. My personal view is social media is as damaging to the human condition as cigarettes. That's my personal view. And so I, especially for young kids, there's all kinds of studies that confirm this. It's a guy named Jonathan Haidt who's done a ton of research on it. I would encourage anybody to look into his stuff. But that's the biggest challenge, in my opinion. And the way we're trying to solve it as parents, which we don't claim to have the answer for, but we try to be very clear on what values do we hold as a family, and we kind of put those in the house in different ways, and we talk about them in different ways, and we have rituals to drive those home. So what do we care about? What do we value? Let's live that to the best of our abilities and be honest when we fall short and make corrections. And then from a social media standpoint, we're doing everything we can to just ban it until they get later into high school. But I think, that it's just hard because all their friends will be on it. And, that's going to be a very difficult challenge. I think that's probably the most difficult challenge that we have as parents right now is raising kids in this hyper-connected, dopamine-induced social media click world. I think that's the biggest difference in my opinion.
Way too early for us to have any meaningful data, but we in Ohio, in our schools, just banned the cell phones during the school day.
I think it's the smartest thing you could do.
We're seeing, we don't have empirical data or anything, and we're hearing anecdotal things that the schools are seeing a little difference in people getting together and so forth.
Yeah.
Which I guess is a reminder to me that mandating things that are the right things, healthy things to do, you have to have the courage to do.
Yeah.
And so as Teddy and I were starting this fitness challenge thing, had all of our staffs working on it and this and that. Everyone said, well, we need to get an app for this rather than spend the money on printing the workbooks.
Right.
And so we got into this debate, and then finally we said, well, look, we just banned cell phones.
Yeah.
And now we're gonna put out a fitness challenge that they got to go to their phone to use.
Yeah.
No, we're gonna take the expense and we're gonna print the. But we are in charge of how we use our 168 hours of the week. I always felt as a college president that there were certain things that you could affect and certain things that you shouldn't affect.
Right.
But there were certain things that you could, and they might not be popular, but if you really can prove that they can be the right thing, the healthy thing, but I don't disagree. On a college campus, you walk around, everyone's just staring. When we came in this building, we're at the Ohio State Medical Center right now. When we were walking in the door, I was walking behind 4 students who all had not their cell phone, but it was their iPad.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they were getting ready, cramming for a test
or
maybe. Whatever.
Yeah.
But there was no one talking to anyone.
Yep.
When I was going to school, if we were walking into the test, we'd be saying, "Hey, what? Tell me about that." We would have been talking about it.
Yes,
right?
exactly. Yep.
But so no, there's no question that that's one of the biggest challenges, and there will be other challenges that we don't even know about.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that the best book on this that I've read is called "How Will You Measure Your Life" by a guy named Clay Christensen. So Clay Christensen was a Harvard Business School professor, mostly an entrepreneurship and innovation professor, but in his personal life, devout Mormon. I think he was a bishop in the Mormon church. Was a basketball player. He was about 6'10". Kids were all big. And he wrote this book, and it's the book I recommend the most to people who are looking
All right,
for
give
advice.
it to me again.
How will you measure your life?
Ooh. When you get to be 73 like I am, you start asking yourself, how will I measure my life?
How will you measure
How
to measure
will-
your life, or something like that? Clay Christensen is the author.
Not to be confused with Clyde.
Not to be confused with Clyde. Probably has smaller calves than Clyde, but Clyde was my wide receiver coach. Amazing guy.
Great guy.
But in any event,
At the Colts.
at the Colts,
Because don't forget Coach Hazel.
Coach Hazel,
Okay, come
also
on.
amazing
All right.
coach, of course. Love Coach Hazel. But anyway, so in that book, Clay Christensen takes the lessons from his business school class and turns them into life lessons. And one of the big ones that stuck with me is he talks about how do you raise your family. And he talks about it in the context of nannies or, getting outside help. And he said, you can choose to outsource anything you want in business or in life. But here's the cost of outsourcing. The culture can suffer. The values don't translate. The quality's not quite there. You don't have as much control or as much impact as you would want. And so the takeaway, for me as reading it is, and it's an obvious one, is, you better invest in that. You better not outsource that. There's a lot of things in life. You can outsource cutting the grass. You can outsource, a lot of things. But boy, you better be careful if you're outsourcing raising your kids and instilling culture. Because, and he says this, you have them for 18 years, and this is true, and then they go off, and they're not there anymore. They can't hear your voice anymore. They're not going to hear you. But what you need is you need them to have the character and the values inside of them when confronted with these things, whether they're consciously calling you up or not. How you've raised them and the values you've instilled inform the decision that is made. And that's where character's formed. Character's formed at the moment of the test. It's not formed
Right.
before the test. You get to decide. You get to show your character the moment you're put into the fire. And his whole point in that was, you better take your job seriously. And I loved that lesson. And it's something that, as parents, we try to, we try to do. And again, like all parents, not perfectly, but boy, would we do anything to get that right for our kids.
I don't know who the author of Deuteronomy was. You're a St. Ignatius grad. I don't know who wrote the book of Deuteronomy. But anyway, it's crystal clear in Deuteronomy that our number one thing is to love our God and, love our neighbor, and then make sure that our children.
That was the lesson that I told you. I talked to Tony Dungy during the George Floyd situation, and that was the biggest piece of advice he left me with. He said, look, I don't, I'm following. I think you're doing a nice job, and, I'm glad to help. Here's what I would say. He said, start at your dinner table. Start right there. Make sure that at your dinner table, you're instilling the right values, you're teaching the right lessons, you're doing all the right things there. Then expand your circle out a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more, until you feel like you're having the impact you want. But he said, if you feel like you got to solve the whole thing, you're probably going to be frustrated. But you can solve what happens at your dinner table. That one is on you and nobody else. And that was such good advice. Boy, was that good advice.
You know what Coach Ginn, another one of your good friends, always reminds me is he said, the best teaching is at the dinner table. That's where we learned. He said, our biggest problem now is we don't have a dinner table.
Yeah.
Think about, we're going to private lessons, or we're going to, this or that, or we're going to catch and he said, it's not that complicated. We got to go back to having a dinner table if we want to build a team.
It's the simplest thing in the world.
Right?
It's true. Yeah.
So true.
Dinner table without a phone.
Dinner table without a phone. But,
Yeah.
probably at restaurants you see families with their phones at the thing.
Yeah.
But I don't know that if at home, because I'm sure mom and dad at the restaurant don't want to be looked at as, beating their kids over the head, right? But at home, you're probably a little more bold with, they put the phone down or leave the phone over there.
Yeah,
but,
right.
But there's nothing more fun than talking about teams. I'm so proud of what you've done for everyone you've touched, and I appreciate you spending the time with us.
Thanks for having me, and thank you for teaching me.
Till the next time, it's all about the team.